Welcome back, everyone, to the From Israel with Love podcast. This is Ben Kerido coming to you from Jerusalem. An elderly man with white hair hobbled his way down to the podium. He was flanked on both sides by military personnel and protected by bulletproof glass. A dark, deep, blood-red background had been ominously projected onto the walls of the historic building behind him. His weak, cracking voice bellowed in rage from the podium, denouncing what he declared to be the greatest threat to the nation he led, the citizens who didn't support him. Is this an excerpt from a history book? Maybe a description of Hitler, Stalin, or Mao Zedong? Is this a sampling of a dystopian novel like George Orwell's 1984? No. This was President Joe Biden's speech in Philadelphia on September 1st, 2022. While Biden's speeches are normally rambling occasions replete with gaffes invoking snickers of laughter from the microscopic audience in attendance, in this case he viciously spewed venom against former President Donald J. Trump and the 74 million Americans who voted for him. Biden said, quote, "Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. There's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans, and that is a threat to this country. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. They live, not in the light of truth, but in the shadow of lies. MAGA Republicans look at America and see carnage and darkness and despair. They spread fear and lies, lies told for profit and power. The MAGA Republicans believe that for them to succeed, everyone else has to fail." End of quote. Yes, I said that in honor of Biden. End of quote. Step aside, Communist China that is exerting economic global domination and dangerously sparring with Taiwan. Move over, Putin's Russia that has launched a deadly invasion of Ukraine and spits in the face of NATO. Get out of the way, a radical Islamist Iran hell-bent on acquiring nuclear weapons and headed towards war with Israel and the rest of the Middle East. Back down, a revitalized Taliban armed with billions of dollars worth of top-notch American military equipment, courtesy of Biden also, coincidentally. Not today, human traffickers and drug smugglers illegally entering the United States like they have season passes to Disneyland. According to President Joe Biden, the greatest threat to America is patriotic Americans who love the United States and still support the most popular incumbent president in American history, Donald J. Trump. Biden's tyrannical tirade could best be described as the epitome of both hypocrisy and projection, a psychological term for accusing one's enemies of the deficiencies and or crimes that the accuser is most guilty of himself or herself. Continuing Biden's speech. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election, and they're working right now as I speak in state after state to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself. They promote authoritarian leaders, and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country. There are public figures predicting and all but calling for mass violence and rioting in the streets. This is inflammatory. It's dangerous. It's against the rule of law. With dementia or some other form of senility clearly setting in, apparently President Biden had forgotten that for years now, Antifa and violent segments of the BLM movement, not Trump supporters, have been rioting in the streets and destroying America in, quote, fiery but mostly peaceful protests. Biden's mind was blank when it came to recalling that far-left Democrats, not conservative Republicans, notoriously knelt for the national anthem and burnt the American flag. Biden didn't remember that it was radical leftists, not MAGA adherents, who threatened to kill Supreme Court justices for maintaining a strict interpretation of the U.S. Constitution and overturning Roe v. Wade. Biden had no memory that it was his voter base, not fans of number 45, that set police stations on fire and screamed, "Pigs in a blanket, let's fry 'em like bacon." And that at this point the conservative criticism of law enforcement is mainly reserved for Biden's anti-Trump Gestapo, the FBI teams raiding Mar-a-Lago with supposed legal justification that is highly dubious at best. And accordingly, the man who slipped and accidentally said, "I will make sure that an election is never stolen again," is now warning the nation that Trump supporters who want to make America great again supposedly plan to cheat and delegitimize the 2022 midterm elections. As George Orwell explained in his famous parody, Animal Farm, the first stage of rising tyranny is hypocrisy and projection. In the spirit of highly concerning memos released by the Department of Homeland Security, Biden emphasized that anyone who questions the results of the 2020 election after seeing documentaries like Dinesh D'Souza's 2,000 Mules or reading the report of the Wisconsin Special Inspector General is the greatest danger of all. And recent polls indicate that a majority of Americans are unsure that the current iteration of the United States government was democratically elected and constitutionally legitimate. In fact, a mere 16% of Americans claim to be fully confident that the election results reflect the will of the people. 16%. That means 4 out of 5 Americans don't believe that the United States government is legitimately elected and reflects the will of the people. And that was a CNN poll, or at least CNN cited that poll. Similarly, Biden's approval rating has dropped to 31% and other abysmal lows in recent months, even according to left-leaning polls. And a theoretical rematch between Trump and Biden clearly favors the ultra-MAGA king for victory by a 5-point margin. But apparently that's what Biden and his colleagues don't want you to think about as we approach the 2022 midterm elections. And he has soldiers stationed around him among a morbid, blood-red backdrop to drive the point home in what might presumably be described as yet another form of election interference: attempted intimidation. When questioned about the bizarre and disconcerting usage of U.S. Armed Forces personnel at a speech vehemently denouncing fellow American citizens, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre, KJP, stated that the purpose of the Marines was to demonstrate the, quote, unique role our independent military plays in defending our democracy, no matter which, and I quote, no matter which party is in power. The military preserves the, quote, party in power from citizens who oppose it. How very Orwellian and utterly terrifying. Speaking of Orwell, Biden's speech was oddly reminiscent of a famous scene from Orwell's 1984, known as the 2 Minutes Hate. Quoting from Chapter 1. Before the hate had proceeded for 30 seconds, uncontrollable exclamations of rage were breaking out from half the people in the room. The sight or even the thought of Goldstein, the archenemy of the Big Brother government, produced fear and anger automatically. He was an object of hatred more constant than great foreign enemies. But what was strange was that although Goldstein was hated and despised by everybody, although every day and 1,000 times a day on platforms, on the telescreen, in newspapers and books, his theories were refuted, smashed, ridiculed, held up to the general gaze for the pitiful rubbish that they were, in spite of all this, his influence never seemed to grow less. Always there were fresh dupes waiting to be seduced by him. He was the commander of a vast shadowy army, an underground network of conspirators dedicated to the overthrow of the state. He was abusing Big Brother. He was denouncing the dictatorship of the party. He was advocating freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought. It seems that Orwell's timeless classics are just as relevant as ever. As Shlomo Melech, or King Solomon of Israel, wrote in the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, or Kohelet in Hebrew, that which has been is that which will be, and that which has been is that which will be again, and there is nothing new under the sun. That's Kohelet or Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. As we watch a senile old man pound his fists in fury, condemning millions of people who oppose him, we are reminded of the never-ending cycles of history in which tyrants rise amidst self-serving hypocrisy and demonization of any who dare to oppose them. And as the bloody sagas of Hitler, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and the novels of Orwell all invariably teach us, the next stage after this is unspeakable atrocity. There is nothing new under the sun. This has been Kerido coming to you from Jerusalem. Over and out, and see you next time. Hey everyone, this is Ben Kerido here to tell you about my brand new book that I wrote with my wife, Surat, called Let's Go Brandon the Novel. It's a satirical parody in the style of Orwell's 1984, The Babylon Bee, and Fauda. It's both a suspenseful and hilarious portrayal of current affairs in the American, Israeli, and Middle Eastern political arenas and military spheres, and includes some delightfully vicious yet comical mockery of Biden, AOC, and many others. For a limited time, the book is being made available for free or heavily discounted to our readers. Check it out on Amazon or visit our website, itowerpublishing.com. Links in the video description.